Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Naruto was Madara's successor? Part 1. Subscribe if you enjoy the video. Let's start the story. Deep within a dark cave in an unknown land, an old man could be heard coughing harshly. The old man sitting on a chair with several cables connected to his back, he had frail wrinkled skin, long dull white hair that hung freely on his face, with a bang covering his left eye. His only visible eye was a deep red color with 3 black in them. The old man slowly raised his right hand, as though signaling someone. A few seconds later, the ground in front of him slowly rose upwards, and a plant-like figure emerged. "You called Madara-sama?" The plant-like man asked in a deep dark voice. "Zetsu, when is he going to attack?" The now-named Madara asked. Not refereeing as to who this he was. "On the day he gives birth. 2 weeks from now, the seal will be at its weakest at that moment," Zetsu replied. Madara nodded his head and dismissed the black Zetsu. 2 more weeks before my successor shall be conceived, he thought with a bit of excitement. He suddenly hunched forward in a coughing fit, bringing his hand forward. He grimaced at the sight of blood on his hand. Setting himself on his throne-like chair, he looked down at his frail body with his Sharingan and frowned. Not much time left, he thought bitterly. Some might say that he already had a successor in Obito, however that was not so. Well, he might have trained Obito and manipulated him into continuing with his plan, or so to speak. Obito was but a stepping stone for him to further his goals. Someone he would cast aside when his grand plan was at play. He wanted someone of his own blood, someone who would one day surpass him in his prime, someone to carry on his blood. Who knows, he might even provide me with a good dance when the time comes. So when he heard about Kushina Uzumaki being pregnant with triplets, he could help but be giddy at the thought of one of them being his successor. Being the child of an Uzumaki no less. The child of the famed 4th Hokage and Kushina Uzumaki, the child was bound to be brimming with so much potential. He would inject the child with his and Hashirama's DNA. Should the child survive, he would become a force unlike any other, a god amongst men. A true successor to Madara Uchiha. A small chuckle escaped from his old dried lips, which soon turned into a dark loud laugh that rang throughout the small dark cave. 2 weeks later, the pained screams of a woman giving birth could be heard. Damn you Namikaze Minato. I'm going to remove that thing that makes you a man. The red-haired woman shouted again. "Come on Kushi-chan, just a little bit more," replied a very nervous and very worried blonde-haired man who was by her side holding her hand. "Don't Kushi-chan me you ah." Her pained grunt was cut off when she felt all the pain she was feeling greatly relieved. The sounds of 3 babies crying brought the panting, exhausted Kushina back to reality. She opened her blurry eyes and saw 2 nurses hold 3 blankets in their arms. "Congratulations, you gave birth to 3." Whatever the nurse was going to say was cut off when a kunai lunged into her head, killing her instantly. A swirl-like ripple suddenly appeared in the air, and before they could even question what it was, a man wearing a black cloak with an orange mask, with a single eye hole, suddenly appeared from the ripple. And he had somehow gotten one of the children and was pointing a kunai at the young infant. "Step away from this or this baby dies at the tender age of 3 minutes," the man demanded, pushing the kunai closer to the child. "Now let's all come down," Minato said nervously, his mind racing through the many possible ways to save his child and family. "I'm perfectly calm, maybe you should take your own advice." The masked man responded back, and to the horror of the 2 new parents, he threw the child in his arms in the air. "Minato!" Kushina shouted in horrified alarm. Minato jumped from his position, and in a display of speed worthy of his title, he disappeared and instantly reappeared in mid-air, with his child in his arms. His eyes widened in horror when he heard the sounds of burning explosives tags. He saw that the explosive tags were tied to his child's blanket. Without a moment to waste, he quickly removed the explosive notes and disappeared from the house to get them away from his wife and his other 2 newborn children. He reappeared a second later in one of his well-hidden safe houses and placed the crying infant in a small little baby crib. "Stay safe Naruto," he said lovingly. A second later he vanished in a bright yellow flash. Moments later, after Minato had disappeared, a dark cloaked figure slowly made his way towards the child. He stopped right next to where the child was and hovered above him. Blood-red eyes glowed momentarily as the man looked at the child. The man gave a small nod, confirming something, before his eyes stopped glowing and he reached into the pockets of his coat. He took out 2 injections from the pockets in his cloak, both with a red liquid inside each. He took hold of the first syringe and injected it into the infant. The young child cried even louder in obvious pain, but the man ignored it. He took the second syringe and repeated the same processes. When he was done, he disappeared into nothingness, as though he was never there to begin with. 3 months later. 3 months had passed since the masked man had released a weakened Kushina and summoned it in the middle of the village. A lot of people were killed, ninja and civilians alike, none were spared. The day marked the greatest disaster in the history of the Hidden Leaf Village. With the majority of the outer sector of the village being destroyed and thousands of lives lost, the great hidden village had a long way to go before it could reach its former glory. The third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, sacrificed himself and used a Shiki Fujin to summon the death god and sealed it within an infant, Hitomi Namikaze. He sealed the yin half of the Kyuubi within the death god's stomach and the yang half within Hitomi. Kushina spent 2 months in the hospital, recovering from childbirth and having the forcefully extracted from her. Only a few people were told about Hitomi being the new strongest Biju. Everyone else was told that the third Hokage died dragging them into the Shinigami's stomach, which technically wasn't a lie, simply a half-truth. Whilst everything seemed to be going well as the village was being slowly rebuilt and getting back to its feet, all was not well in the Namikaze household. The youngest child of Minato and Kushina Namikaze Naruto, was terminally sick. When Minato had come back to take Naruto from the safe house after saving him from the masked man 3 months ago, he found him pale and breathing heavily. Minato quickly rushed to the hospital to find help for his son, however even their best medics couldn't find what exactly was wrong with the child. Jiraiya had once suggested that maybe it was because Naruto's body had become reliant on the Kyuubi's chakra within the womb and without it, was shutting down or was not function well. However, that idea had quickly been shot down. If that had been the case, then why was it that Hikari, their second child, was not suffering the same fate? In desperation to find a cure for his son, Minato had sent Jiraiya to find and bring Tsunade back to the village. If anyone could find what was wrong with his son and cure him, it was her. That is where we currently find them now, in the hospital room with Tsunade standing in front of the bed where a baby Naruto was lying. He was plugged into several machines, cables, and had a breathing mask on him. His small body was frail with very light pale skin, on top of his head, a mash of bushy blood-red hair could be seen. He looked to be at death's door, and the only thing keeping alive was the beeping machines that he was connected to. Shizune. Tsunade called. A brown-haired girl, who looked to be at least 9 years old, rushed into the room holding a large file in her hands. Yes, Tsunade-sama. The girl practically squeaked out. Get me his files, I want to see all the results of his blood test, Tsunade asked as he ran her glowing hands over Naruto. Shizune handed the large file that was in her hands to her. Tsunade took the file and started looking through all the pages. After a little while, she closed the file and addressed the worried family who were looking at her intensely with a serious face. Tsunade saw Jiraiya, who was leaning on the widow with arms crossed and a grim look on his face. Minato was holding his 2 daughters and looking at Naruto worriedly. Kushina, however, was the worst of all. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were puffy and red, showing that she had been crying. She had dark rings around her eyes. She was sitting on a chair which was right next to her son's side, looking at him with worry, love, and guilt. Tsunade coughed into her hand to gain all their attention. Kushina jolted up from her seat and looked at her. Minato moved a bit so that he was facing her. Shizune, could you leave us for a while? Shizune looked at Tsunade and was about to object, but when she saw her serious face she nodded her head and left the room. She knew better than to question her master when she was serious. Whatever was going on had to be very important for her master to not only kick her out, but to be this serious. Tsunade rarely ever became serious. After making sure that no one was listening in on them and that her apprentice was out of earshot, Tsunade finally spoke. Your son is suffering, from what I can tell, is that his body was injected with someone's DNA, 2 people to be exact, she began. Everyone in the room gasped. She waited for a few seconds to allow them to digest what she had just said before she continued. His body is rejecting the new DNA, which is why he is in this state. By all rights he should have died during the first few hours that his body had come into contact with the new DNA. However, because of his strength and healing factor, his body has slowly been accepting the new DNA, combining it with his own. His Uzumaki genes and a small amount of the Kyuubi's chakra within his body can be thanked for that. Tsunade finished. The room, as silent for a few seconds before. What? You mean to tell me that someone did this to him? I swear to Kami, when I get my hands on that son of Kushina. Minato called out before said woman could continue with her murderous, angry runt. Kushina looked at her husband with anger clearly visible on her tired face. She saw the serious and worried expression on his usually calm face. He looked down at their sleeping daughters in his arms. The 2 babies stirred a bit from the noise and looked as though they were going to wake up. After a few seconds of waiting, the 2 calmed down and went back to sleep. But that makes no sense. Why would anyone do such a thing? More importantly, who did it? Jiraiya asked, standing up straight and speaking for the first time. Whoever did it had to be someone very powerful to be able to break into my safe house without my notice, or it was someone close to us who knew about Kushina giving birth and the location of where she gave birth, Minato speculated, his eyes narrowing in deep thought. Oh? Why is that? Jiraiya asked. When Kushina and I were separated, I took Naruto to one of my secret safe houses, not even my personal Anbu guard knew about. The house is surrounded by several barrier seals that make it nearly impossible for anyone to enter that house without a special key that only me and Kushina have. Not only that, but anyone that tries to enter the house will set off an alarm that will wear me. Everyone became silent after that before Kushina spoke. Maybe it was the masked man. He managed to break into a house guarded by the best Anbu in the village and took Naruto before any of us could even notice. His ability to teleport anywhere and become intangible would allow him to easily get inside, Kushina suggested. Minato shook his head negatively. It couldn't have been him. I was with him during the whole ordeal. Maybe he sent a clone whilst he fought you, Jiraiya added. Whatever the case may be, it still doesn't explain why they did it, Minato replied with a frustrated sigh. Can you tell us whose DNA was used by Tsunade-sama? Kushina suddenly asked, bringing everyone's attention to the blonde Sannin. Tsunade opened the file she was holding and skipped past a few pages before stopping at a seemingly random page. She was silent for a while as she read through the information on the page. Everyone watched as she suddenly froze, her eyes widened, and she started going over the page again and again until she dropped the file altogether. What does it say? Kushina asked worriedly after seeing her reaction. The results show that your son was injected with the DNA of Senju Hashirama and Uchiha Madara. Both DNA have almost completely merged with his own, Tsunade said. Her body was shaking slightly and Jiraiya was doing the perfect impression of a gaping fish. It also showed that the DNA will fully merge within 2 months. By then he can in all accounts be considered as a Senju, Uchiha, Uzumaki, and Namikaze. Talk about a long surname, Jiraiya added jokingly. However, no one even paid attention to him. All of them were still frozen in shock from what they had just heard. In the early morning of the great village of Konoha, the sun slowly rose, enveloping the entire village in its golden warm rays. All was silent as the village slowly rose from its slumber. The wind was softly blowing, gently caressing the many houses and buildings. A few Anbu and ninja could be seen jumping soundlessly from rooftop to rooftop. And Naruto, Namikaze, this is the last warning I'm giving you. Wake up. The voice of Kushina Namikaze could be heard all the way to Suna. A small red-haired boy who looked to be 6 years old groaned from the comfort of his bed as he reluctantly raised his head. He blinked a few times before rubbing the sand in his eyes and got up from under the covers of his bed and made his way to the door. The young boy gave a small sigh as he slowly opened his door and started to do a mental countdown. 5 4 3 2 1, Naruto-kun. 2 excited shouts was all the warning he got before he was tackled by 2 red blurs. He groaned in obvious pain and discomfort. Having experienced the same thing every morning, you'd think he would have been used to this by now, however that was not the case. Hitomi, Hikari, get off me, Naruto said, after trying and failing miserably to get away from their morning death hugs, as he had called them. For a few seconds nothing happened before 2 pairs of arms unwrapped themselves from him. Morning, Naruto-kun, the 2 sisters said simultaneously. The first person whom Naruto saw was Hikari. Like all of them, she had red hair and deep blue eyes. Her hair was long, reaching her waistline. She looked much like their mother when she was young. The second red-haired girl, Hitomi, looked much like Hikari, though unlike her sister her hair was shorter, reaching barely past her shoulders. Her hair was a lighter shade of red. As for the rest, well, they were pretty much alike. Morning, Hikari-chan, Hitomi-chan, do you have to do this every morning? The 2 girls pouted and looked at him with teary eyes, slightly quivering lips, and hugging each other with their faces pressed together. Come on, Naruto, stand strong, don't fall for it, they are just doing. His thoughts were cut off when both girls' shoulders started to shake. Fine, you win, he said with an annoyed sigh and muttered something under his breath that both girls did not hear, which did not stop them from instantly cheering and giving him a big hug. Naruto-kun, Kacchan said we have to get ready. Hikari was the first to speak. She tried to put on a serious face and for further emphasis, she put her hand on her hip, copying what she had seen her mother do a few times already, though that only made her look cuter. Read for what? Asked a now confused Naruto. He heard Hitomi giggling and turned to her, waiting for her to answer. The academy starts today. Remember when Naruto froze, then slowly his eyes lit up in excitement, a large smile slowly made its way across his face, and faster than the 2 could blink, Naruto rushed to the bathroom. A few minutes later he came out wrapped in a towel. He went back to his room and they heard clothes being shuffled around, and when the door opened again, Naruto could be seen wearing a dark blue hooded jacket with a white shirt inside. He was also wearing black shorts and blue ninja shoes. Let's go already, we're going to be late. Naruto shouted to his sisters who were still standing at his door with a stupefied look on their faces. Naruto-kun is weird, they both thought, and a second later they followed him down the stairs. In the kitchen, Kushina smiled when she heard the footsteps coming from upstairs. Her smile got even wider when she saw her son followed by his sisters. Good morning, Kacchan, Naruto greeted his mother. Morning, Kacchan, Hikari and Hitomi greeted their mother after coming down the stairs. Kushina walked towards her and kissed them on their foreheads. The children knew their father usually woke up early and left for work whilst they were still asleep, and seeing that he was not in the kitchen where he usually was in the morning, they knew he had already left for work. Kushina knew how much her husband wanted to be there with them on their first day of the academy, but there had been an emergency at the Hokage Tower, so he had to leave earlier than usual. "Good morning Naru-kun, Hika-chan, Hito-chan. Are you all ready for your first day of the academy?" The triplets nodded their heads excitedly, though she noticed Naruto was the most excited one of them all. Honestly, it did not surprise her at all with that blood flowing strongly in his veins. It was to be expected. "How about we stop at the Ichiraku ramen stand on the way to the academy?" Kushina suggested, earning 2 excited squeals of agreement and 1 grunt of disagreement, which did not surprise her at all. It was a surprise to everyone when they discovered that Naruto, unlike his mother, father and sisters, did not like ramen. In fact, he actually hated the food. This came as a shocker to everyone, especially Kushina, with how much both she and her husband loved the stuff. They expected all their children to love it too, if not more. Though he did have a favorite food which he loved just like his family loved ramen, and that food was Pocky. The first time he had tasted it, which came as a gift from Jiraiya, who had forgotten that it was their birthday and had searched his pockets for something to give them and had produced a packet of Pocky. Well, the 2 girls found the Pocky a nice treat. Naruto had loved it and became obsessed. Till this date, Minato still cursed Jiraiya for that packet of Pocky that he gave his son. "Don't worry, we will get some Pocky for you on the way." Naruto smiled excitedly. Nothing outdid Pocky. At the academy, Kushina and her children saw the academy building a few meters away. She looked at her children and saw them walking a few paces ahead of her. She smiled knowingly. "They sure are excited," she thought to herself. She frowned a bit when she noticed that Naruto was covering his head with the hood of his jersey. She knew why he was doing it. When they had discovered about Naruto being part Uchiha and part Senju, Tsunade had done a bloodline test and had discovered that he indeed had the capacity to activate the Sharingan, but did not know about the first Hokage's wood release, as it was never documented as a bloodline and no other Senju, even his children, had awakened the wood release. Jiraiya had suggested that they release the information to the rest of the village. Kushina, like the protective mother that she was, had refused the idea, not wanting to point an ever bigger target on her child. In the end, it was Minato who convinced her by asking her how they would explain to everyone how he had activated the Sharingan if he did, and if that was a big if, he managed to use the first Hokage's wood release. In the end, she had reluctantly agreed with them, telling the villagers. On a lighter note, Tsunade had agreed to stay in the village and was now the head of the medic department. Her reason for staying, you might ask. Well, it was rather simple really. She now had a living blood relative. With Naruto having Senju DNA, her grandfather's no less, he unknowingly had become a member of her family. So after a few hours of deep thinking and weighing the pros and cons of staying, Tsunade had chosen family over adventure, so she decided to stay. Both Minato and Kushina had asked her to become their children's godmother, a position which she tearfully agreed to. When the news was released to the village, naturally everyone was shocked at first, and eventually they got over their shock, and many had accepted the news with happy, excited faces. A few, Danzo, had even gone as far as to suggest that the child be trained as a village weapon. With the amount of potential that the child possessed, he would easily become powerful, a fact that many agreed to. His idea, however, was quickly shot down, rather painfully, by a very angry Kushina. The Uchiha clan were the only ones who were against Naruto possessing the ability to activate their precious bloodline, the Sharingan. But when Minato had explained just whose blood was used and what that exactly meant, they all seemed to suddenly change opinions. Madara Uchiha may have been considered one of the biggest traitors in the history of the Hidden Leaf Village, but no one could dispute his strength. He was after all the strongest Uchiha ever born. The fact that someone alive had the same blood and would hopefully have the same talent as he once did in his prime easily shut them all up. The Uchiha elders better improved their image of the young Namikaze by explaining to the clan how they could use him as a way to improve the clan's reputation and power. When the boy managed to become very strong, which everyone knew he would, they would claim it was because of their mighty Sharingan. Their reputation would rise exponentially as the boy became stronger, and even better, it would show everyone, especially the Hyuga clan, just who was superior. So Naruto had become the talk of the village, with everyone holding high expectations for the poor boy. As Naruto grew older, many of the villagers would treat him, and to a far lesser extent, his sisters, like princes and princesses, which technically they were. Shops often gave him free food or treats. People would sometimes give him a small bow as he walked past them, and this only got worse as he grew older. Minato had to daily refuse marriage proposals from many nobles and families. Naruto was constantly the center of attention wherever he went. This unfortunately had the side effect of making him avoid going outside of their house, and at one point refused to go to the park on their usual family outings. More unfortunate was that he mostly spent his time in the house and avoided people like a plague aside from his family. And sad to say, because of his distance and avoidance of people, Naruto did not meet any children his own age, and because of that he did not have any friends. Hikari and Hitomi were treated like princesses because of them being the children of the Hokage, but their treatment was not as severe as their brothers. Sure, people greeted them wherever they went, and a few shops gave them free treats here and there. It was nothing that was bad enough to deter them from having a normal childhood. And unlike their distant brother, they had friends who were all the children of the clan heads, Yamanaka Ino and Hyuga Hinata. Kushina increased her pace when she saw the many villagers that were looking at them, specifically her son, and whispering to themselves. When she was beside him, she reached down and took hold of his hand. He looked up at her in confusion, and she gave him an encouraging smile. He smiled back at her and nodded back at her. By now the academy building was very close. Inside the academy, all the parents with their children were led to an empty hall, where the ninja hopefuls were introduced to their new senseis and were shown to their classes. And so came the time for each parent to say goodbye to their children and leave them in the care of their new instructors. Unfortunately for a few, what was supposed to be a simple gesture of hugs and a few words of encouragement turned into an embarrassing scene. Now remember, don't start a fight unless you have to, and if you do get into a fight, make sure you beat the little punk into a pulp, that way they will know never to mess with you, Kushina advised her children, who all sweat dropped. What kind of advice is that? They all thought. And another thing, don't let anyone bully you. If they do, tell your teacher, or better yet tell me so. Naruto ignored her from that point, choosing instead to look around. He saw a few adults that he recognized either from one of the shops he had visited earlier or from having met them on the streets. A few kids that he recognized were those that usually played with his sisters. One of them he recognized clearly was a platinum blonde-haired girl with light blue eyes, Yamanaka Ino. She usually came to their house and played with his sisters. However, even though she frequently visited their house, he had never said a word to her. The other girl that he recognized was an indigo-haired girl with lavender pupil-less eyes. Her name was Hinata, heiress of the Hyuga clan. From the brief meeting between the two of them, Naruto had noticed that she was very soft-spoken and very shy. She rarely came to visit his sisters, and when she did, she was always accompanied by a guard. Before Naruto could continue with his observation any further, the angry shout of his mother stopped him. Naruto, Hitomi, Hikari. The three children almost jumped in fright when they heard their mother shout at them. They looked at her and gulped when they saw the angry expression on her face. Were any of you even listening to what I was saying? Kushina asked with a sigh after calming down. Yes. They all answered asked at the same time. Kushina's shoulders slumped and she muttered something under her breath that none of them heard. The instructor that had previously addressed them all and asked all the parents to leave as it was time for the young students to go to their classes. Kushina hugged all her children one last time, giving them all a kiss on their foreheads. She stood up straight, wiping the tears that were threatening to fall from her eyes. Remember to stay together, I'll be waiting for you at the gate when the academy ends, okay? She looked at her children and took out a camera from Kami knows where and asked them to stand together. Naruto was standing in the middle while hugging Hikari on his left and Hitomi on his right, both girls giving a peace sign. She took the picture and with one last wave, watched them follow the other students to their classes. She waited for a few more seconds before wiping the fresh tears in her eyes and followed the other parents out of the hall. They grow up so fast. When Naruto first heard that he would attend the academy, words could not begin to describe how happy he felt. He had begged his parents to start training them early, and they agreed. So at the tender age of 5 years old, his parents started training them. Although his sisters took the training seriously as they could for their age, Naruto was more dedicated. He practiced his kunai and shuriken accuracy every morning for at least 3 hours and would go through the taijutsu stances his father taught them every day. Now, one would wonder why a child so young would train so extensively at such a young age, instead of playing with other kids or doing other things that children his age would be doing. Truth was, Naruto knew people treated him differently. He was not stupid, far from it actually. What he did not understand, however, is why people treated him the way they did. Sure, his parents were very powerful and known throughout the entire elemental nations, but he could not help but feel that there was a deeper reason for it. The fact that everyone he met treated him with far more respect and prestige than his sisters further helped prove his point. He hoped that by becoming powerful and making his own reputation, people would finally recognize him for him and not for the name he carries. So day after day he would train aimlessly, wanting to prove to others his own worth. When his parents told him that he would be attending the academy, he was ecstatic. This was his chance to prove himself. He could not help but be giddy at the thought of the things he would learn, all the powerful techniques that they would be taught. Like many children that were attending the academy, he was sorely disappointed when during the first week of the academy all they learned was the history of Konoha and other minor things. In all honesty, he had no idea what those lessons had to do with being a ninja, since it wasn't something one could use to save their life or the life of someone else. His sisters seemed to actually enjoy the academy, perhaps it was because they got to spend a lot of time with their friends. Still, friends aside, he was seriously regretting ever attending the academy in the first place, and to think, he still had 6 more years to go before he could graduate. -6 months later, Naruto sat in his usual place in the class, which was at the back. He looked around the class and saw his sisters, like always, sitting a few rows in front of him. Not much had really changed in the past 6 months, he still disliked the academy and the fact it had yet to be taught anything noteworthy. Annoyed, he had asked his father when they would start teaching them real ninja stuff. His father had just chuckled and told him that they would eventually be taught. To Naruto's eternal frustration, however, his father never did say when that would be. Although, there was something that had happened that made him happy. He had made a new friend, his first friend ever, to be exact. Flashback. 5 months earlier, the bell had just rung, signifying that it was break time. All the students excitedly rushed out of the classroom, not that anyone could blame them, after all they were free from the boring preachings of the teachers, for a few minutes at least. Naruto walked around the school playground, looking for somewhere to sit, preferably somewhere where there were no other kids. He saw his sisters sitting under a tree chatting happily with their friends, Ino, Hinata, and a pink-haired girl who they had just recently made friends with. After a few minutes of walking, he found an empty bench, which was thankfully hidden by a few trees. He looked around to see if there was anyone around who might have been using the bench, and after finding no signs of anyone around, he sat on the bench and was about to open his bento when he heard a few shuffles in the nearby shrubs. He waited for someone to appear, but no one showed up, however the shuffles continued. Curiosity getting the better of him, he stood up and walked towards the bush. He stopped right in front of said bush and spoke up. "I know you're there, you might as well just come out." He called out, trying and failing miserably to make his voice as stern and commanding as he could. With him being so young and his body not yet having gone through puberty, his voice came out more like a cute squeak than anything else. There was a moment of silence before whoever was in the small shrub started to come out. The person who came out was a tad bit taller than Naruto, meaning that he at least had to be the same age as him. He was wearing a long-sleeved, hooded, light green jacket that completely covered his body from the waist up, with a tall collar that hid part of his face. The hood was up, covering most of his short and spiky dark brown hair. Inside his jacket, he wore a green shirt with dark brown pants that ended midway down his calves. He was also wearing the standard dark blue shinobi shoes. Round and thin wired black sunglasses hid his eyes. His name, from what Naruto could remember, was Shino, heir of the Aburame clan. Like most of his clansmen, he was a very silent person who only spoke when spoken to, and even then he would only say a few words. Not that Naruto had ever spoken to him before, he had noticed all of this because they were in the same class. There was an awkward silence between the two before Naruto spoke. "What were you doing?" "In the bushes, I mean." Shino raised his hand and on his finger was a small black bug. "I was studying the types of insects that I have found here at the academy," Shino said, looking at the insect on his hand. "Oh," was Naruto's intelligent reply. Honestly, he had no response to that. The awkwardness further increased as the two boys stared at each other, unsure of what to do or say next. "My name is Naruto, by the way. Namek is Naruto." Naruto introduced himself, stretching out his hand. Aburame Shino introduced himself, bringing his hand up to grasp and shake Naruto's outstretched one. Flashback end. Ever since then, they had started hanging out more, and before long they had become good friends. His mother had been really happy and slightly relieved when he had told her that he had made a friend at the academy. She had been worried that her son would never make any friends of his own. Now if only she could convince him to make more. Naruto was brought out from his walk down memory lane by the sound of the bell ringing, signifying the end of the school day. After saying goodbye to his friend, he made his way to the academy gate where he saw Hitomi and Hikari waiting for him. "Hurry up, Naruto. Kachan is not here to pick us up," Hitomi shouted out excitedly. Their mother had started taking missions again 3 months earlier. She probably got bored of being alone the whole day, Naruto thought to himself. She would usually come home before dinner, since she did not take missions that would take her far from the village. Nor would she take those that would take her a long time to complete. He knew why sisters were so excited, and to an extent, so was he. Their mother only allowed them to eat ramen pocky once a week, and with how much they loved those foods, it was torture for the 4 of them, their father included. So whenever their mother was away like today, they would visit the Ichiraku ramen stand. In Naruto's case, the pocky store, and treat themselves to several bowls of ramen and pocky sticks. Picking up his pace, Naruto walked to the gate and the 3 made their way to their destinations. 1 hour later, after their little snack, the trio made their way home. As they approached their house, they all felt a deep feeling of foreboding. Feeling slightly scared, they slowed down their pace and slowly opened the door into their house. The house was silent, too silent. A very bad feeling slowly rose from the pits of their stomachs. Dusan Koch and Hitomi called out nervously, her stuttering voice ringing throughout the empty house. They slowly walked into the dining room and were about to turn and go upstairs when suddenly, before they could even blink, they heard a whistling sound like something cutting through the air at great speeds. Acting on his gut, Naruto jumped in front of his sisters. For a very tense second, everything was deathly silent before Naruto. The horrified shrieks of Hitomi and Hikari rang through the now not so empty house. Naruto looked at them in confusion, wondering what had made his sisters scream out his name in obvious horror. He felt something sticking out of his stomach. He looked down and to his shock found the end of a kunai knife sticking out of his stomach. He saw that the area around the kunai was turning red. "Oh" was the only thing that he managed to say before he saw the ground getting closer to him and heard the screams of his sisters. Two men dressed in black Anbu attire, wearing blank white masks, suddenly appeared inside the room. Both of them were holding a kunai in each hand. However, the two distressed girls were at their mother's side, crying and screaming for their brother to wake up, completely oblivious to the two men behind them. They didn't understand what was going on, all they knew was that someone had hurt their brother and their brother was now on the ground, bleeding. Normally, in a situation like this, you would have to run away and get help. However, both girls were only 6 years old, add on to the fact that they were too shocked and scared to do anything, so they did what any normal child would do. Cry. Naruto could see and hear his sisters crying and he could feel an extreme pain in his stomach area. Through his hazy vision, Naruto could see two black figures moving slowly towards his sisters. He tried shouting for them to run, but every time he tried to speak, the pain would intensify tenfold and all he managed to do was to try to rasp out something that made sense. Despite his efforts, however, both girls did not even hear what he was trying to tell them. His mind was shouting, screaming for his body to move, but it would not respond. "Move, move, move," he chanted in his mind. At the very last second, just when the dark figures were about to reach his beloved sisters, he felt it. Something warm, something powerful, rushing through his veins like fire. The pain in his stomach suddenly disappeared, his vision cleared and became even sharper, and time slowed down for him. But the primal roar, he jumped to his feet and with lightning fast speed, he yanked the kunai from his stomach and stabbed it into the first Anbu's heart. The second Anbu was shocked at what he had seen and froze for a second, a mistake that proved to be his downfall. At that very moment, Naruto with all the strength he could muster threw the bloody kunai in his hand at Anbu's head. He could clearly see the kunai traveling in slow motion to the surprised Anbu's head. He saw, as it ever so slowly, plunged itself deep into the man's head. He saw the man's eyes change from that of being surprised to that of horror, finally to the emptiness that accompanied lifelessness. All this happened within a fraction of a second, and this was all forever recorded in his brain. When the man fell to the ground, Naruto blinked, surprised at what he had just done, and his surprise soon turned into horror. Before he could even mutter a single word, his eyes rolled to the back of his head and he fell to the ground. However, he never felt his body reach the ground, as he felt two rather soft arms catch him. The last thing he saw was a red blur and a flash of yellow before everything went black. A few minutes earlier, Hokage office. Minato sat in his chair with a very bored look on his face. He was almost finished with the paperwork of the day and would soon hear home to his awaiting family. He glanced at the clock and saw that it was already 3 o'clock. Kushina had yet to report in, which meant that she had not picked the children up from the academy. They probably stopped for some ramen on the way home, he mused. Yes, he knew about their little stops when Kushina was not there to pick them up. He had caught them one day, using the crystal ball when he was checking to see how they were. He did not tell Kushina, after all he ate ramen a few times during the day. Telling her would not only make him a hypocrite, but would also make her become suspicious of him too. Speaking of Kushina, he could feel her chakra signature approaching. Minakoi. Without knocking, Kushina barged into his office. He smiled at her and stood up to give her a kiss. "How was the mission?" he asked her, after breaking off from the kiss. Same old, I had to kick some evil mercenaries," Kushina responded, unconsciously adding her verbal tick at the end of her statement. Minato just sweat dropped at the vague mission statement that she gave him. "Are you ready to go home, or should you go on without you?" She asked him. "I'm finished. Let me just grab my jacket," and I lost both home. At the house, when both parents flashed home, they immediately knew that something was wrong. For one, they could both smell blood in the house. Minato could not sense any of the Anbu that were always guarding their house and children, and lastly yet most importantly, their ninja instincts were telling them that something was wrong. One does not make it far in the ninja career when you don't listen to your instincts, for they are almost if never wrong. Now on guard, husband and wife made their way into the dining room, where the stench of blood was strongest. Through the corner of his eye, Minato could see Kushina struggling with not just rushing in there to see if their children were safe. Only years of being a kunoichi stopped her just barely. When they finally reached the dining room, what they found shocked them. Hikari and Hitomi were kneeling on the ground with tears in their eyes, looking at where Naruto was standing with his hand outstretched with a large amount of blood on his stomach and hands. They looked at, more specifically, his eyes. They were surprised to see two red eyes, with a single tomo in each eye, looking at the dead figure with a kunai logged in his head. Kushina was the first to recover from her shock when she saw his eyes turn into their normal deep blue and roll into the back of his head. She moved quickly and caught him before he could reach the ground. Minato recovered a second later after Kushina. He instantly created two shadow clones that disappeared after nodding at him. He then moved to the Anbus to check if they were dead and saw that they indeed were dead. After that, he went to see if his daughters were hurt and saw that they were fine and were just traumatized. He pressed the back of their necks and they both fell into his arms, unconscious, giving them a chance to recover from the shock. Kushina had caught her son before he could fall to the ground and she noticed instantly that he was pale, which was probably from the loss of so much blood. She cradled him into her arms and turned to see Minato holding their daughters, who were both passed out in his arms. Now extremely worried, she quickly voiced her concern and question. "What's wrong with them?" she asked, trying to stop herself from breaking down and freaking out, which she knew would only make things worse. "They are both fine, just a bit traumatized. I knocked them out so they could rest. How's Naruto?" He replied, showing far more control over his emotions than his wife. "From what I can tell, he has lost a lot of blood. We have to take him to the hospital immediately before his situation gets any worse." At this, Minato nodded his head and moved closer to where his wife was holding their son. She grabbed his shoulder and there was a flash of yellow light. When the light died down, they were all gone. They never noticed a single plant root spread out on the ceiling. At the hospital, the only warning that the hospital staff got was a yellow flash of light before the fourth Hokage suddenly appeared with his family. Upon seeing the limp, bloodied children, Tsunade, who had luckily been at the front desk collecting some medical files, quickly rushed to the family. She grabbed the attention of a few nurses working and guided the family to an empty emergency room and made quick work of attending to the wounded children. -2 hours later, after 2 hours of waiting, the emergency doors opened and Tsunade stepped out. Kushina immediately rushed to her with Minato not far behind. "How are they?" Kushina asked worriedly. Her eyes were red from crying and fresh tears were already gathering. "Both Hitomi and Hikari are fine, they had no physical injuries on them. However, both of them were traumatized and will likely be suffering from nightmares for a few days," Tsunade explained, receiving a sigh of relief from both parents. "Your son, on the other hand, he lost a lot of blood. This caused his body to go into shock during the operation. It took us several minutes to stabilize him before we could give him the blood replenishing pills. He was the most traumatized and I had to put him into a drug-induced coma-like state to allow his body and mind to fully heal." Both parents were silent before Minato asked Tsunade a question that was plaguing his mind. "How long will he be in the coma for? With his higher than normal healing rate, he should be awake in a week's time. I would suggest that one of you be here when he wakes up, seeing a familiar face might help." The two worried parents nodded their heads and released breaths that neither of them knew they were holding. "Now, would one of you please tell me what happened to my godchildren?" Tsunade asked sternly. Minato sighed and looked at his wife, who was already at her children's bedsides, looking at them with so much love and worry, deep emotions that only a mother could bring out. "We arrived," and so Minato explained to Tsunade how they had arrived at their home to find their daughters crying on the floor and Naruto standing in front of two dead bodies. Tsunade was shocked and horrified at what she had been told, having guessed that Naruto, at 6 years old, had already made his first kill. 1 week later, the first thing he felt upon waking up was a splitting headache and the constant beeping sound was not making it any better. He slowly opened his eyes and quickly closed when he was assaulted by bright light that hurt his eyes. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes again and looked at the window. He noticed that it was bright outside, probably midday. Growing confused with each passing second, he sat up from the bed and tried to remember how he had gotten here. Like a dam exploding, his memories came rushing back to him and he remembered everything. How he had been stabbed in the stomach with a kunai while saving his sisters. Taking said kunai and stabbing the kunai deep into the man's heart and throwing it with dead accuracy at the other man's head. The lifeless expressions from the men stared at him, the images playing over and over in his head. He did the only thing he could. He let out the loudest scream he could ever muster. He held his head with both hands as he continued to scream. He never heard the door open, all he felt was the warm presence of his mother hugging him. He slowly stopped screaming and started crying as his mother continued to hold him and was now making cooing sounds to calm him down. After 30 minutes of crying, his wails quieted down into small sobs. "I'm sorry, Ka-chan, I didn't mean to make Naruto cry out. I know, it's okay, nobody is going to hurt you. Kachan is here, Kushina said soothingly, with tears running down her face. This continued for another hour, before Naruto finally fell asleep in her arms. By then she was humming a soft melody to help calm him down, and thus allowing him to drift off to sleep. She looked at the door and saw Minato, Tsunade, and Kakashi standing there, looking at her. She blinked and wondered for how long they had been standing there for. Her face turned serious when she addressed them. Did you find out who was responsible? She asked, not looking at any of them, but at her sleeping son. I'm afraid not. Whoever was responsible made sure to cover their tracks. I had Inoichi search the minds of the dead Anbu, however their minds had already been wiped clean. A memory seal had apparently been placed on them to wipe their memories clean, should they have been caught or died. Minato answered her, with his hands clenched, clearly angry. Kushina's hair slowly rose and started flowing angrily in the air behind her. When I find out who is responsible, I'm going to make sure they suffer. Death. She said darkly, and Kakashi, who had been silent the whole time, slowly backed away from the ever-increasing killer intent that Kushina was releasing. Thankfully for him, Naruto, who was still sleeping, stirred a bit, his body slightly shaking. Instantly the Kai disappeared and Kushina was now holding her son even closer and was muttering soft words to him. Everyone in the room sweat dropped at the 180-degree change she had just gone through. Women, the two men thought to themselves. Unknown location. In the dark building, hidden underground, an old man with a bandage covering his left eye and his left hand wrapped in bandages stood, holding his cane in front of two kneeled men in front of him. Report, mission successful, Danzo-sama. Subject, Namikaze Naruto has awakened both the Sharingan and showed signs of using wood release. One of the men reported in an emotionless voice. Danzo nodded his head and tapped his cane on the ground and the two men vanished. Good. With the boy's power growing steady and from such a young age, he shall become a force to be reckoned with when he grows older. A pity I could not take him under my foundation, Danzo thought to himself as he turned around and walked towards his own office. Thanks for watching my video, see you next time, till then sayonara.